Yo, welcome to Alpha Omega University. I got the wrong screen up, but that's all right. I'm gonna start off these first videos right off the bat. Listen, I made a change. I evolved. The stream has evolved, man. This music makes me sad. Where's the hype? Listen, we got some hype music, but we got some nice and slow, man. We can't just be hype all the time. People got high blood pressure and shit, bro. You gotta account for the masses. You know what I'm talking about? So the stream has evolved, man. So I figured out that I can make all the videos that I have for each stream, I can put them in this fucking playlist, and then I can just play the fucking playlist the entire time, and that way we can watch the right things the entire time. I told you guys from the beginning, man, I'm learning as we go, right? I'm learning as we go. And so while I learned how to deal with all this fucking streamer shit, right, you guys will be learning how to fucking ZvZ, and that's all right. So it's a give and take, all right? All right, so today we have a very, 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 very anticipated episode by many people. Today is episode 3, Destroying the Meta. All right, so the title in and of itself should tell you at least a little bit. We're going to be talking about what the meta is today, which we've already talked about. And listen, if you haven't watched the previous videos, they're on the YouTube channel. I believe they're still on Twitch as well, but they're going to be removed off Twitch in like 2 weeks or something like that, because they don't stay up in Twitch forever. But they will on YouTube, right? So the YouTube channel, if you just scroll down, you're gonna see the link to the YouTube channel there, and you can watch the videos before, right? So the videos, the last week on Friday and last week on Saturday, we talked about the metas, right? And we talked about all the metas and why the metas have been created and what was the point of each meta, and the influences that the game has had, but also that players and guilds have had on creating metas, right? Well, today we're going to talk about how we get to destroy the meta. And I'm not going to talk about all metas and how we destroy all metas, right? I'm going to focus on how we destroy the meta that exists in the game today. Okay, because I want to try to bring you guys some information that's actually useful right now, right? That way you guys can start applying this shit and start getting rid of the meta that is today, right? And I'll tell you guys, I'll tell you guys the truth. I'm going to give you guys a disclaimer on this, all right? Just like all the other episodes, I wrote this episode back in December, right? And the meta has not necessarily changed, but changes are starting to happen, okay? So it's very, very important that we make sure we get this video up as soon as possible, this stream up as soon as possible, this episode, because in my prediction, maybe in about 3 months at the most, by the end of next season, at the most, I think that's absolute most. By the end of next season, this meta will no longer work as much as it does now. Now, does it mean that it's going to be gone forever? No. It's not going to be gone forever. It's always going to be around, as every other meta in previous time is still kind of influencing the current state of the game, right? It really is. And so what I'm more saying is this episode is going to focus on being able to talk about how to effectively counter the current meta that exists today and what we can learn from that, right? Because that's the most important thing, is like the meta is going to go away at some point because people are going to learn how to counter it, right? People are going to watch my stream right now and they're going to be like, oh yeah, and now we're going to know how to fucking counter the meta, all right? So all of those things are going to happen. That's great. But we need to find out, how do we counter the next meta after that and the next meta after that, right? And so first, we're going to take this one meta that we have right now. We're going to dissect this meta. We're going to find out why this meta works, because that's the most important thing, right? Most people just say, oh, well, this meta does this meta does that, and because it does that and does that, we need to do this to make sure that we destroy it, right? And like, that's the wrong way of looking at it. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the people that run the meta, right? You need to put yourself in the shoes of people like Escalation, right? Pora does this. Black Order does this, right? You need to put yourself in the shoes of those people and realize the reasons why they choose to run this meta. And those reasons are the things that make the meta work, the compositions of the Zerg and the play style of the Zerg. What makes it work? You take that shit away from it, all right? You take that the idea of what is actually working for them, and then suddenly nothing will work for the entire meta. All right. Meta is kill enemies. Yeah, It's facts, but how do you kill the enemies? How do you kill an enemy that is ensuring that you can't kill them, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to start off by defining the current meta. All right, we're just going to briefly define the current meta just for the people that didn't watch the previous episodes. I want to make sure you guys kind of just get an idea of what I'm talking about, right? Oh, he's reading chat. Yeah, I am. I'm reading chat. Yeah, this is motherfucking time trying to talk shit. It's all right. You can talk shit. That's okay. I don't mind. He do read chat. Yeah, I try to read chat as much as possible. I sometimes I kind of get sidetracked and I kind of lose track of the chat here and there, but I try to stay on top of it. Yes, this is live. Wow, big butt. Yeah, so we're gonna start talking about the current meta. We're just gonna define it real quick, right? And then we're gonna go into how this meta came to be, right? We're gonna talk about the history of the game that allowed this meta to exist, right? What made this meta exist? And then we're gonna talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this meta. And then finally, we're gonna talk about how we actually counter the meta, right? After we know the strengths and weaknesses and how this meta came to be, we're going to talk about countering the meta, and we're going to finish off with executing the strategy. Because just because you know how to counter a fucking thing doesn't mean that you are able to do it, right? Those are two very different things that people need to kind of pay attention to, right? So let's get on with it. Enough fucking talking. All right. So the current meta. All right. I'm gonna make it as simple as possible, right? We'll take some time on it to explain, but I'm gonna make it simple, right? The current meta is heavy burst melee DPS. That's what it is. That's really like at the heart of this meta, right? It's heavy burst melee DPS. What I mean by that is, okay, so burst DPS is essentially like, you hit your fucking E and all your damage hits a clump and then they all fucking explode and die, right? Everybody knows what fucking burst DPS is. It's like a brimstone, right? That's fucking burst. But we're talking heavy melee DPS, meaning that there's a shitload of burst melee DPS, right? Whereas in previous metas, in previous years, it's been like range DPS, right? Where you got a bunch of brimstones, you got siege bows, you got, energy shapers, mist piercers, right? Those are all burst, but those are all ranged, right? Now we're having a burst, but melee DPS. And I do want to mention, we've never had this, right? We've never in the game, in the history of the game, have had this at all, ever, okay? So heavy burst melee DPS is something it's not new in the sense of the idea. It's been tried before, but it's never succeeded before. And that's the main thing that you guys need to notice, is that it's never succeeded and now it is. So now we need to find out, why is it succeeding now? All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. So the main weapons that we're talking about in the heavy burst melee DPS meta is Demon Fang, right? And like that's the number one, like that's the one that you see the most of, right? You see Demon Fang, you see Raven Strike, you see Bridled Fury, you see Realmbreaker, right? Realmbreaker's, in fact, Realmbreaker has been seen so much in the past like few months with this meta that SBI went and fucking nerfed it, right? It's no longer a 20% HP reduction. It's now 15%, right? So it's like these weapons are dominating the current meta, right? Spartatech says, I remember Galatines in the past. Yeah, I mean, Galatines are still being used, right? It's technically a melee DPS and it's technically burst. The only thing about Galatines is that it occupies a niche role where it's actually like an off cooldown type engaging weapon, right? But shit, today I was fighting one of the fights, I think it was 21 UTC, and I got one-shotted by, I'm a tank, by the way, I play fucking tank, right? And I got one-shotted by a Galas, bro. Like, yeah, I mean, Galas are still very powerful, right? So the next thing that is part of this meta, so like that's the main aspect of the meta, right? Is the melee DPS being burst, right? And a lot of people go and say, oh no, it's a brawl meta. It's not a brawl. Brawl is bruiser, right? Where it's a bruiser DPS, not a burst DPS, right? So burst DPS unloads their damage in one hit and tries to get clump and kill, right? Whereas bruiser is kind of like whittling down the enemy bit by bit, and basically you're gonna beat them as soon as the enemy healers run out of mana, right? Like that's how bruiser compositions work. And bruiser zergs have happened before, but burst melee DPS has not happened before, okay? So another thing of this meta is the because it's so heavy on burst damage, right? Because it's so heavy on burst damage, they have to have supports that counter burst damage, right? It just makes sense, because if the meta, so and again, when we talk about the meta, we're talking about the majority of composition of Zerg that is used across the game, not just one guild, not just two guilds, like most of the game does this to a certain level, right? So basically the supports that they need is, they know the meta, they know that it's burst melee DPS, so they know that they need supports that can stop that. And what kind of supports do that? Things like Enigmatic, right? Enigmatic is it's a long channel, but at the end of the day, it's to counter burst DPS, right? Whether it's ranged or melee, it doesn't matter. Enigmatic counters burst DPS, right? Before they changed the Great Arcane, that's why Great Arcane was used so much, right? Before they changed it, because yes, it was good. Great Arcane was great, but that's not necessarily why everybody used it. It's everybody used it so much because one, it was great, but two, because the meta was clump and dump. It was burst DPS, right? So if the clump happened and you threw a Great Arcane on it, you literally stopped everything from the enemy, right? Which is another reason why the Demon Fang had a big success during the Great Arcane era, was because of the Demon Fang's ability to hit the E 3 times, right? So you can hit one and then you're like, oh shit, they Great Arcaned it. And then you wait and you wait and you wait. And then you hit your other two after the Great Arcane is done, right? So that's why Demon Fang took a big hold into this meta. The next thing about the meta is the healers, right? So if you look around at the healers of the Zergs that use this meta primarily, you're going to see that they don't have a lot of natures. Right, nature has become kind of like a secondary thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, since they made like what's it called, the Fallen, since they brought up the Fallen, right, and they made it like really good and basically OP, and now everybody carries Fallens for like years ago, right? Nature took a back seat, right? It really did. But the thing is that every Zerg still had quite a few natures. And now you don't see natures that often in Zergs anymore. And if you do see natures, what nature do you see? You see Blight. That's basically the only nature you're really seeing out there. You don't really see Wilds and Rampants too often. And you're going to be like, oh, well, my guild runs that. It's like, yeah, but we're not talking about your guild. We're talking about the entire game, right? We're talking about the entire game as a whole. And the entire game as a whole does not run nature healers as much as it used to. Why? Because nature healers heal over time, right? It's very simple. Nature healers heal over time. Yeah, like Cat Speak says, nature is a waste of a party slot. Here's the thing, it's not. Nature is very, very fucking important, man. It's so important. But again, we fall under these ideas, these wrong ideas about what is good and what is bad, only because we take a look at the meta and that's it. But we never question the meta. We always say, people are doing this, people are doing that, and that's great. That's great that people are doing that. And that's great that it's working for them. But if you don't understand why it's working for them, then you're literally just going to be following like a fucking sheep, and you're never going to be able to create your own reasoning for the meta. And you're going to be applying the meta, but in the wrong way. And it's not going to work for you. And you're like, damn, why is it not working for me, but it works for them? Well, it's because you don't understand the meta and they do, right? So nature is very important, but it's not important when you're fighting a Zerg that is only burst melee or burst DPS, whether it's melee or range, doesn't matter, but burst DPS, right? So if you're fighting a burst only DPS, then you don't really need natures. It's just that simple. You don't really need nature. So that's why the healers in this meta have been primarily Fallen, right? The next part is the tanks, right? So if you look around, you don't have too many, how do I say this, tanks, right? Engaged tanks. So the engaged tanks are the clump tanks, right? Like they're like the fucking the one-handed mace if you run the air compressor, right? The Hodge, Hand of Justice, right? Camland, but they don't really do Camland anymore, right? Like Camland's kind of gone kicked down the can, right? Like nobody really cares too much about Camland, and it's not because Camland is not good. It's because Camland is a ranged clumper, right? And you no longer have a ranged DPS Zerg. You have a melee DPS Zerg. So therefore, you need a melee clumper, right? Again, understand why these things change. Don't just be like, oh, Camland sucks. No, it doesn't. Camland's still great, but it's great for a different type of Zerg. And if you're running the meta, you're running the heavy melee burst DPS, then yeah, sure, you don't want to run Camlands. It doesn't make sense, right? But you need to understand why, right? So because of the way that the meta works with all the heavy melee DPS, they're actually running less clump tanks than we used to. right? It used to be that clump tanks used to be like maybe 2 or 3 people out of the 4 tanks in the party, right? Like usually most parties are 4 tanks, right? So if you didn't know that, I'm just letting you know right now. Like most parties will run like 4 tanks, at most 5 tanks. But generally speaking, out of those 4 tanks, 2 or 3 of them were clump tanks before, okay? Now it's becoming to the point that now it's like almost definitely 2 of them will be disengaged tanks, and even sometimes a third will be disengaged tank, right? You'll have like a clumper, like a Hand of Justice, and then you'll have either a Grove or a Heavy Mace and a Grail Seeker, right? And then suddenly there's your 4 tanks, and you look at that and you're like, damn, that's a lot of disengage. That's not a lot of engage. And that's actually a thing that has come out because of the meta, right? So if you think about this, if you have the heavy burst meta, that means that you're inflicting all the damage you can possibly inflict onto the enemy in one fucking hit, right? And that hit is going to be powerful, right? It's going to ensure kills, which is great. But what happens if you get 10 different fucking clumps on the enemy on 10 different angles, and your Zerg engages all 10 of those clumps? They're going to kill nobody, right? So because of that, you have to limit the amount of players that are actually creating clumps, right? You don't have to limit them, but it's better if you do, because that way you actually create only a few clumps that actually will get hit and deleted. This is also why Hand of Justice has become really, really, really used, is because if you have one clump, let's say you have a one-handed mace air compressor, right? And they get a big clump, and the Hodge comes in from the side. What does the Hodge do? They drag more people into that clump, right? They drag more people into that clump. The Hodge itself is not creating the initial clump. It's the one-handed mace. But the Hodge is pulling more people into that one-handed mace clump, right? And so what happens is now you have a fucking mass of like 20 some dudes in one tiny group because you clumped all of them, and your entire Zerg is burst. And they see one clump. They see one clump. So guess where everybody's going to hit? They're going to hit that one clump. And then you suddenly kill 20 people in one hit, right? Again, understand why the meta exists. Why is Hodge so used now when it didn't used to be used much, literally 6 months ago, 7 months ago, 8 months ago, right? Why is it used so much now? It's not like they changed it and made it so much better or anything. No, it's because the meta has changed, right? This weapon is better with this meta, right? So then another thing that is part of this meta is because it's melee, right? Melee has a huge disadvantage in the sense that it's melee, right? It's not range. So you can't shoot over walls. You can't shoot over ridges, right? You can't shoot at a distance. You can't hit at a distance. So because of that, things like castle fights have dwindled. Like if you look at the fights on a daily basis in the game, you're going to notice that most fights happen in open world now. Now, when you compare that to a year or two ago, right, you're going to realize the complete opposite. In fact, if you compare it to 3 years ago, it's absolutely complete opposite, right? Like 3 years ago, it was like literally every single fight in the entire game was in a castle, right? In a fucking castle, and that's it. All fights were in castles. Now it's like the majority of fights are in open world. People don't take territory position anymore. People don't take castle position anymore. Why? Because it's not advantageous to the melee meta that they are running. But here's the thing, when both sides of the Zerg are both running the same exact melee DPS burst style comp, then they're both going to choose to fight in open world, and they're both going to choose to basically clump and dump each other, right? And that's just what's going to keep on happening. So the open world emphasis is a big part of this meta. And one critical part of this meta is the flood style. Right now, when I say flood style, I have to kind of define this, right? The flood style is a style of calling, okay? It's not necessarily a style of composition or anything like that. It's a style of calling, okay? A flood style is a style where you go and take your entire Zerg and you just flood into your enemy. You get inside of your enemy, right? And you make it hard for them to make engages in different directions, right? They don't know if they should engage west, east, north, south, because you literally got guys north of them, south of them, east and west of them, right? So like when the enemy caller, if you're flooding the enemy and the enemy caller is going to make an engage, where is he going to engage? Is he going to engage northwest? Is he going to engage southwest? He doesn't fucking know, right? Because you're all over the place, right? You're literally all inside of each other. This is what the flood style is. Gath Twitch says Arch playstyle full dive. Yes, exactly. And see, we say Arch playstyle, But the playstyle has been around a long time, and Arch has been the one that has employed it the best over time until now, because now we have this meta. And so therefore now with the flood style meta and the heavy burst melee DPS, it's working even better now, better than what Arch used to do, because Arch used to do it with just heavy numbers, right? Now the meta is basically accomplishing this without having the huge numbers. They're accomplishing it with even numbers, but they're still flooding the enemy. And that is absolutely key to understanding how we destroy the meta. I'll explain more later. So now we're going to move on to the next section, which I'm going to talk about why this meta, right? Why did this meta happen? Why are we sitting here talking about, you know, melee DPS and damage mitigating, like burst damage mitigating supports, and why, you know, like the wild staffs and the rampants have gone, you know, fucking out of the game and shit. You know, like what led historically in the game, what led to this meta being created, right? And this is very important to understand because it'll give us clues as to how we can destroy it, right? So going back in time, right? Fucking put in the fucking time machine, right? Back to the future style, all right? And then we're gonna go back in time into about season 13, all right? In season 13, we had, and just think about the entire season 13, we had Blue Army and PoE as a coalition with a bunch of other, like I say Blue Army and PoE, but like you got to add in all the other guilds in the entire game that helped those two, right? And then you had the Elevate and I'm just gonna say the Elevate coalition, right? Just to make it broad, right? The Elevate coalition and all the people in the entire game that helped that side of the coalition, right? In season 13, you had that giant war. Now, that giant war was a result of multiple wars between Blue Army, PoE, and Elevate, right? Multiple wars that spanned back, like season 7, season 8, and you know, the leaders of Elevate were leaders of other guilds before and stuff, and so you really can span this all the way back to like season 5, season 6, all right? Like that's how far back this fighting went, right? So if you think about it, the groups of people that were fighting each other in season 13 were players who had been fighting against each other for like three and a half fucking years straight. Every single day fighting against each other. Maybe they changed tags. Maybe they changed alliance. Maybe they changed gear. Maybe they changed callers. Maybe they changed leaders. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the individual player, that's what I'm talking about. The individual players on each side had been there for so long, fighting against each other, competing at the highest levels of the game, right? So when season 13 ended and Blue Army said, we're done, and disbanded, what happened? Suddenly, all the people on Elevate side who had lost the war, they lost that war in season 13, right? All the people on Elevate side who had lost the war no longer had a purpose because Blue Army left the game, and they had been fighting each other for a long time, right? So therefore, they no longer had a purpose. They said, all right, a lot of them quit. But because Blue Army disbanded, a ton of Blue Army people disbanded, a ton of, or not disbanded, stopped playing the game, right? A ton of people from Blue Army stopped playing the game. They retired from the game. They said, we're done. We're moving on. We're doing other things. Okay, great. Fine, right? And that's not just Blue Army, the guild. That's all guilds associated with Blue Army. A lot of players across the entire game stopped playing. And these are the top level players. These are literally the best players in the entire game when it comes to ZvZ, right? And then the Elevate guys did the same thing. Again, some of the best players in the game from the Elevate side decided to retire, right? But then Elevate kind of came back in season 15, right? And they said, okay, we want to win a season. We're calling everybody back. We're calling it in. We're going to win season 15. And great, they won season 15. But then after they won that season 15, what happened to Elevate? Elevate disbanded. And because Elevate disbanded, they basically gave all their members that cherished season win, right? That they really wanted a season win. And Elevate leadership gave their members that season win. And because their members got their season win, then guess what? A lot of players decided, you know what? I'm done. Like, I achieved what I wanted to achieve in the game. I'm retired. I'm done. I'm done playing this game. And because of Blue Army disbanding in season 13 and then Elevate disbanding in season 15, because these two giant guilds disbanded, a ton of players, of the top ZvZ players in the entire game, stopped playing. They retired. They no longer played. And the few that did remain, right? The few that did remain joined a bunch of different guilds, right? And they started spreading around the entire game and into different guilds. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, the average player quality of ZvZ in the entire game suddenly lowered drastically, right? When the entire game, the ZvZers in the entire game were at a point where they were really, really strong, and you were able to manage your Zergs really well because you had the majority of your players were veteran players, right? Now suddenly, the majority of your players are not veteran players. The majority of your players have played the game for less than a year, right? And most of them have not played more ZvZs than maybe 10, 15 ZvZs in their entire time, right? So Zergs had to contend with having lower quality players, okay? So when you have here a Zerg, let's take Escalation, for example, all right? Let's say you are in leadership in Escalation. You now have a choice. You can either choose to say, I'm gonna invite a whole bunch of new players and I'm gonna train them. I'm gonna teach them the game from the very beginning. I'm gonna show them the ropes, right? And it's gonna take a long time to teach these people. It's gonna take literally years, right? But I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna work my ass off, and I'm gonna train that Zerg. Or instead, and this is what Escalation actually did, you can advertise your guild for veterans, and you can say, "Hey guys, listen, I know that the game kind of went down a lot in Zerg qualities, right? But guess what? The few players who are actually still good and veterans and still like good ZvZers, we have them in our guild. So if you're a veteran and you're a good player and you want to keep playing, you don't want to retire, you want to keep playing, guess what? You can come to our guild." That's exactly what Escalation did. Other guilds like Momentary or Pora, right? Last Home, they did that. They did exactly that. They advertised their guild for veteran players, right? So these were the two options that that leadership in every guild across the game had. They either could advertise their guild for veterans or they can train a new Zerg. So the guilds that decided to train a new Zerg were guilds like Take Care, Militant, EQMS, Press to Play, right? These are some of the guilds that really chose to say, I'm going to train a new Zerg. I don't give a fuck about everything that happened. I'm going to start from the ground. I'm going to build a core and I'm going to make it work and I'm going to make it happen, right? I'm going to train people from the beginning, right? These are the guilds that did that, right? And so now when you look at Take Care is kind of like a little bit of an example, a little less of an example, because Take Care, basically what they did is, I think it was what, season 15 or season 16? Season 15. I think it was season 15. Take Care, season 15 went and taught a bunch of members how to play the game. Literally, like people who literally had just started the game, right? They brought them from a New World and they decided to teach those guys how to play and everything. And it was great. And then suddenly they got to like the top levels of the game where ZvZing at the top levels and stuff. And then they disbanded, right? So they didn't choose to continue on, but had Take Care continued on, they already had built a core and they had a good group of people that could continue on, but they chose not to. But Militant, EQMS, and Press to Pay continued. Now Press to Pay is disbanded now, or is disbanding. So that's another one that's kind of falling apart. And this is the thing, right? Guilds that choose to train a new Zerg, it's tough. It's really tough. This is why most other guilds instead advertise their guild for veterans. They said, no, I don't want to train all these fucking people because it takes forever. And it takes a lot of money, right? Economically speaking. And it's just not fun for so many people when you lose fights over and over because you're learning, right? So a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to jump into the fun, right? And so it was a lot easier to take the path of advertising your guild for veterans. And so the guilds that instead decided to train the new Zerg ended up having a lot more obstacles in their way, right? But there are some guilds that are succeeding really, really well, right? And those guilds, in my opinion, are going to become the best guilds in the game at some point if they continue doing it. But again, it's a very, very slow and long process, right? And so the outcome of both paths, right? So the outcome of what happened because people advertise their guild for vets like Escalation, Pora, Last Home, right? What happened is they had a very, very high player turnover. What I mean by this is, okay, so think about this. At the end of every season, players quit the game. That's just what happens. Or they quit the guild and they join somewhere else, right? That's what happens. But here's the thing. When you have veteran players who have played the game for a very, very long time, right? Those crusty old vets, right? Those guys have played so long that they are very close to just retiring at any point in time. And any time the season ends, those guys are the first to fucking stop playing, right? They're the first to retire. So what happens is that the player turnover for the guilds that advertise themselves for veterans was extremely high. And because that player turnover was extremely high, the recruitment standards had to be lowered. Because remember, they were advertising their guild for veterans, right? So they were saying, oh, only veterans. So I'm only going to allow people with 100 mil PvP fame or whatever the number was, right? I'm only going to allow 100 mil PvP fame, right? Players. So with that, you're a veteran, you can join. If you're not there, then too bad. Then you don't get to participate in our guild, right? But because of the high player turnover, and that's what happens when you have too many vets in your guild, right? They had to lower the recruitment standards. And Escalation did that. Pora did that. I don't know if Last Home did, so I can't say that. But I know for a fact that both those guilds did. They lowered their recruitment standards in some shape or form, right? This lowering of standards happened because they realized that their player turnover was too damn high, and the amount of people out there that would meet their standards was literally decreasing season after season, right? So that's the outcome that happened with those advertising the guilds for veterans guilds, right? Here's the thing. That outcome is still happening, by the way. It's still happening, okay? Every season, here and next season, it's still happening. And unless they start to change their mentalities and now start to train more players, brand new players, right? They're going to start having a lot more problems every season from here on forward, right? So the Zergs that decided to train a new Zerg, the guilds that decided to train a new Zerg, they actually now have built small cores. And now those cores of people, there may be like 15 people, 20 people, some of them maybe even 30 people, right? Who are just absolutely like people who are part of that guild. They're gonna stay in that guild and they love that guild, right? They're fucking, they are that guild, right? Those cores are going to be very, very important to expanding later on, because once you build a core, that core then goes and teaches the new players. Whereas if you just invite a bunch of veterans feel like, oh no, I've already done that. I've already taught a bunch of people how to play. I'm not going to do that shit again, right? Whereas people who come in and get trained there, suddenly they feel like, oh man, I rose up here at this guild. I'm going to help somebody else rise up here at this guild too, right? So they want to help. So cores are very important. So the other guilds that I mentioned, like EQMS, and Militant, and even Press to Play, although Press to Play is gone now, but even Press to Play, they created small cores, right? And they have these small cores right now, and those cores are going to continue growing over time, right? So because of the continued low player quality, right? Because across the board, all Zergs in all the game, the player quality of all ZvZers in the game is lower. Even in guilds such as Escalation, who advertise themselves for veterans, they still don't have as high quality Zerg as like Blue Army had or Elevate had in Season 13, right? So because of that, these leadership players, these callers, these guild leaders, they had to basically make a kind of a plan. How can we go and achieve the best possible results while having a Zerg that is not as good as I'm used to, or maybe not as good as I would want them to be, right? So I need to choose a ZvZ strategy that will basically ensure that my Zerg is gonna be able to accomplish the tasks, right? So what I'm talking about is, okay, think about this. If I am one of the best callers in the game and I know how to call at like fucking S tier, right? Great. But then my Zerg is a fucking F tier Zerg. And I go and try to tell my F tier Zerg what to do with like S tier calls. They're not going to understand. They're not going to know what the fuck I want them to do. And they're going to make mistakes. They're going to fuck it up. And we're going to lose. Right? It's just that simple. You have to kind of call at the level of your Zerg. Right? So a good caller is constrained by how good his Zerg is. Okay? So because of that, you now had like a bunch of different strategies come out, and that's one of the big strategies that came out, and this is why the meta kind of started happening, right? And people in leadership and escalation have told me this. People in leadership and other guilds have also told me this, exactly the same, right? That it's because player quality has gone down in the game that they now choose to follow this other meta that is easier to accomplish, because the melee burst DPS meta is easier to accomplish, right? So basically the noob friendly, quote unquote, like noob friendly strategies, right? So they needed things to be easy for people to follow, right? This also meant not just the calls had to be different, but the composition had to be different, because certain weapons are harder to use than others, right? Like say like a Brimstone is harder to use than like a Demon Fang. And now a bunch of people are gonna be like, no, it's not. Yes, it is. And the plain reason is this, right? Brimstone is squishy. They'll die very quickly. Whereas Demon Fang, you have a lot of mobility. You get to run around and position yourself basically however the fuck you want, because it has so much mobility, right? Brimstone gets interrupted. Demon Fang does not get interrupted, and Demon Fang has 3 E's, right? So you can, even if you miss your first one, it's like, okay, well, you can still hit the other 2, right? Or you hit your first 2 and you miss your third one, okay, well, you still did damage. Right? So basically what I'm saying is they had to apply noob friendly composition, right? This noob friendly composition is built with the heavy melee burst DPS, because the heavy melee burst DPS is easy. That's all it is. It's easy. You understand? It's not that it's good. It's not that it's the best. It's that it's easy. And because it's easy, it can be applied to the lower quality Zergs that we have in the game today. Okay, again, this is extremely, extremely important to understanding, because a lot of people think, oh, this is the meta. The meta is great, and because of the meta, you know, we have to follow it, right? But here's the problem. If you don't understand why the meta is the meta, then you will not be able to counter it. Because I'm telling you right now, this meta is literally the easiest meta to counter. Out of all metas that I've seen in the game ever, this current meta is the absolute easiest meta to counter. There's never been an easier meta, I promise you. But because the quality of players and callers and leaders and guild leaders across the entire game, because the quality of players across the entire game has gotten so low, people can't figure this shit out. People can't figure this out, and the people that do figure it out, they can't apply it, because you want to know why? Because this one guy goes up to his guild leader and says, hey, I got this idea. I know exactly how to defeat that meta. We should do this. And you know what the fuck the leader says? He says, sit the fuck down. You don't know shit. Get the fuck out of here. Right? And then suddenly that guy's like, bro, what the fuck? Like, I know exactly what's going on. Just do what I'm telling you. And then the leader's just like, no, we're going to follow the meta. Because people are blindly following metas. Right? And then you're not letting anybody tell you that this meta is not the meta because it's great, but because it works. There's a giant difference. Right? There's a giant difference. Now, with that kind of, I kind of, you know, explained why this meta came to be, right? Let me catch up on the chat a little bit here, because I know I talked a lot here. Latorian says, all respect to Africa. He is doing this, calling for a few different guilds. Yeah, I mean, Africa's a unit, man. Africa's a unit. I got a lot of respect for him especially recently with this war that he's having with Triple X and Terra. A lot of respect, because before this war, he was kind of like a how do I say this? A guild caller. He was a guild caller. He wasn't a kind of like a war caller. Although he had warred before, he was never a war caller. Now he's a war caller. And I'm not gonna go into like explaining the differences between a war caller and like a Zerg caller, but yeah, no, the dude's been doing a lot, and that's good for him. Appreciate the history. Yeah, no, thank you for watching, Trainer Free. All right. Banana Banjo says at the end, BA was not a guild. It was most like a family for OG who were here at the creation of BA. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm talking about, right? It's like players who were really old, and really old players. That means that they have a lot of experience, and a lot of those players stopped playing the game, and that's my point, right? That's literally what happened with the game. Latorian says, not gonna lie, not even damn. I've seen a lot, except more experienced players, because you gotta know the timing. An average kiter, this DPS Zerg can counter this meta. Yeah, an average counter. And yeah, Latorian. See, Latorian in the chat, like this dude's played the game a long time, right? He knows this game pretty well, right? And he's saying it right there. An average kiter DPS Zerg with like a ranged DPS Zerg can counter this meta, and that's absolutely true. See how he's not saying, oh, it's a like a high level kiting comp, or no. Literally, an average guild doing an average composition for kiting will destroy this meta completely, and it's absolutely true. I'll get into that in a minute. So, Spartatex, how to counter meta, get better player. Yeah. But here's the thing, it's not about getting better players, man. Because right now, like, say Escalation has really good players, right? And I'll invite you guys on Monday. Make sure you guys are here for the stream on Monday. I have another stream tomorrow, right? But the stream on Monday specifically, I'm gonna be reviewing a video of Escalation ZvZing. This happened on Monday, and I'm gonna review it this coming Monday, so in a couple days. And they did a ZvZ, I think, against Prologue. I think it was against Prologue. And Escalation was running a ranged DPS Zerg. Del Negro was calling. They got absolutely pummeled. Like, it was atrocious, man. It was atrocious. And here's the thing. The player quality in Escalation is much higher than most other Zergs in the game, right? I mean, they are literally the best Zerg in the game right now because nobody else is beating them, right? So they changed their style from melee DPS to ranged DPS for this one CTA, and they got absolutely pummeled. Like, they literally had no idea what the fuck they were doing on the field. So no, man, better players does not equal better results. It really doesn't. Gath Twitch says, whoever guild leader said that without thinking will lose after time. Yeah, you're talking about the guild leader that's basically shutting people down. I mean, here's the thing. I say it because I've seen it a lot, man. I've seen it a lot, especially in smaller guilds. Smaller guilds who have not accomplished much at all in the game tend to have the highest ego about all the things that they should do. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. Day trading Mikey, ZvZ seems like way too much to learn, then too much to get everyone on the same page. It is, man. It is a lot. It's a lot, and that's literally why I have this entire stream, right? Is to teach the ZvZ, because when I had to learn ZvZ, like way back in the day, there was no source for me to learn from. And this is literally the purpose of this stream, is so that you guys have a source to learn from, right? That way you don't have to learn by dying on the field and losing all your gear over and over and over every day for months and months, right? That way you guys can actually have some sort of like idea about it before you do go in to ZvZ. Frozen Legend says, you gotta admit though, abusing Ravens, Demon Fangs were way too OP not to abuse. But now these are balanced, I think ranged is definitely better. So, okay, Demon Fangs, Demon Fangs are not OP, and they were not OP before they nerfed them with the bringing the 75% resilience to 50%. They weren't OP before that, and they're not OP now. Same thing with Raven Strike. They're not OP. Here's the thing. It's very easy to counter them. And again, I'm gonna go into it in a minute. It's very easy to counter them though. That's my point. And the problem is, like, people are not doing it. That's all it is people are not doing it. You know? Depends. Headbutt engages. Marcia says, headbutt engages seems like the logical counter to a meta that funnels all your DPS on a clump. Headbutt engages. I don't know exactly what you talk about with headbutt engages. So I don't know exactly how to respond, because I mean, like, if you're talking about like, oh, like they're funneling all their DPS onto a clump, and then so you're just gonna counter engage with your heavy burst melee or heavy burst DPS in general. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that absolutely does make sense. Yeah, because they are funneling themselves. They really do. Hiccup says, worst I've seen in a long time from Eska, got smoked, 43 kills, I think. Most militant gets every CTA Sarge do. No, man, Militant's good, man. Militant's good. Militant, like I said earlier, it's like it's a long, slow path, but it's a path that'll bring you success. If you think about guilds like CIR, right? CIR is still around in the game. Fucking old ass guild. They're still around in the game. And a lot of the guys who started playing there in CIR are still there, right? I mean, guilds that survive a long time, it's because they took the time to build their cores, man. That's all it is. Blue Army, they built their core. They went to Anglia and shit, built their core, and then, you know, came out, right? So building core is extremely important. Comes down to skill player, fake engage. I mean, fake engage is a strategy you can use. Yeah, it's a strategy. All right, so sorry, I caught up now. It took like 5 minutes. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the strengths of this meta. All right, we're gonna talk about the strengths, and then we're gonna talk about the weaknesses. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the good things that this meta does. All right, now give me a second because I gotta drink water, man. We gotta stay hydrated around here. Otherwise, I'll lose my voice. All right, so the strengths of this meta. So it's a burst style, right? So that's a strength because burst style means that you get to engage quick, right? And it gives very little amount of time for reaction for the enemy, right? That's the strength of burst, right? Because if you're a bruiser, you're basically letting your opponent have a lot of time to figure out how to counter you or how to like CC you or slow you or stop you from constantly hitting them, right? It's a very slow moving thing. But burst style, and this is ranged or melee DPS, right? Burst style Zergs are very quick. So it's like you have to respond quick. And the thing about burst style too is you got to realize some people don't have very good ping, right? And even beyond very good ping, some people don't have very good computers or very good internet, right? So because of that, burst style works really well against those Zergs that have a lot of people who don't really have good internet or reliable internet and stuff like that, right? So why? Because they have to respond quickly. And if they lag, then they can't respond quickly, right? It's really simple. So that's why burst style has been very dominant in the game forever. Is because there's a big factor to reaction time, right? And some people are just slow to react. Like they may have a great computer, low ping, whatever, but they're just very slow to react. They see a clump and they're like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? You know? So it's like some people are just like that, man. That's just the way it is. So it exploits the reaction time of the enemy. That's why burst style is good. And also because in burst style, you engage quick, but then you also get the fuck out quick, right? You don't necessarily go and stay there a long time and be like, hey, you can engage me, hit me, you know? You kind of just hit and you get the fuck out, right? So that's a very big strength of all burst style Zergs, okay? Another strength of this specific meta is that it's chaotic, right? When you flood your enemy, the enemy is like, oh shit, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And then the enemy's like, walk north. And it's like, yeah, but like, which north? You mean like northeast? You mean northwest? Like, the enemy's all over me, right? So people get kind of like, they get kind of chaotic in their heads and they don't know what to do. And it limits their ability to respond. This is especially true for newer players, right? And remember, again, think about this. The player quality of the entire game is lower, right? So chaos style Zergs don't fucking work when there's a high skill level on both sides. But when there's a low skill level, you create chaos onto the enemy, and the enemy, because they're low skill level, they are more prone to not know what the fuck to do, to get lost in the Zerg, to not know which direction to engage, right? Because that's a skill level thing. So back in like season 13, you didn't see any fucking Zergs running chaos style Zergs unless it was like Arch, but that's it. You know what I mean? Like, because yeah, it's like you try to create chaos onto like Blue Army, like they're gonna laugh at you. Like it's not, you're not gonna create any chaos, right? You try to do that for even Elevate 2. Elevate was pretty strong, right? Homeless Crew, very strong. So what I'm saying is like, you try to create chaos onto those Zergs in season 13, season 12, whatever. It's like, dude, you're not gonna get away with it. You're not. They're gonna laugh at you. But when you try to create chaos onto Zergs like Arch, holy fuck, chaos is enabled, right? Like, because they're lower quality Zergs. And now the entire game is lower quality, isn't it? That's what I just told you guys. So therefore, a chaotic style is useful because most enemies who are lower quality will not know how to respond. This another thing about this meta, the melee burst, or actually all melee type metas will have this, is that they're more individualistic, right? What I mean by this is that they're more like talking about the individual, right? Every player, you kind of get to do whatever the fuck you want. You get to walk around where you want to go. You get to do whatever you want. You get to engage whenever you want. Now, not fully engage whenever you want. I mean, that for burst DPS, it's more like you engage on the timer. But sometimes you have the freedom to engage, say, northeast instead of northwest, right? Because this style of flooding is very individualistic. It relies on the individual player as a whole. And again, think about that, right? It relies on the individual player. When you look at escalation, their individual players are significantly better than the individual players of most Zergs in the game. Which means that an individualistic play style works really well for them because they are exploiting their advantage, which is skill level. If you go and try to tell your entire Zerg that is really a really good, strong Zerg, and you try to tell them exactly what to do, exactly how to do it, exactly when to do it, you're not allowing an individualistic style. And so you're basically removing skill. This is why big Zergs that are filled with like newer players, like, you know, like Grape was doing this, right? Grape was doing it. Has a ton of like shitty players, right? Grape up in the war in the north, right? They've been doing this where they literally tell every single one of their members, you have to follow my call absolutely to the letter. You cannot deviate at all, not a little bit. You can't engage west when I tell you engage north. You can't walk south when I tell you to walk north. You can't, it has to be exact. Why? Because you want to remove the skill level issue because your player's skill level is low. But with escalation, it's the opposite. Because escalation quality is so much better than everybody else in the game, they want to exploit that. So they want to run a style that allows the escalation players to just do more of what they want to do. You want to position yourself this way, go for it. You want to do that, go for it. You want to hit that other clump instead of this one, go for it. It's a lot more individualistic. That's another strength of this meta, but it's only a strength if you have a higher level Zerg. And again, people just go and follows the meta for no reason. If you go in and if you look at your Zerg and you're like, yeah, my Zerg is not like top of the line, then don't fucking do this meta because it's not going to work for you, right? If you're wondering, why doesn't it work for me, but it works for them? That's because they know how to do it and they have the skill level for it, right? So this allows an individualistic play style. Now, when I say that, this doesn't mean that this is a hard. Remember, I said earlier, right? And this is very important that you guys distinguish the difference because I said earlier, this style is an easy style for newer players to follow. So why is it easier to follow for new players? Because they get to do whatever the fuck they want, right? But they get to do whatever the fuck they want, but at the same time, they are more effective if they have high skill level, right? Because following exact calls is harder than just telling your members do whatever the fuck you want. But if you tell your members do whatever the fuck you want and they're a bunch of noobs, they're not gonna get anything done, are they? But if you tell your members do whatever the fuck you want and they actually are pretty good, not elite players, just pretty good players, right? They're gonna accomplish quite a bit. It's really that simple, right? So this strategy is twofold. It can either hurt you or it can help you. And it's very important. Again, you need to understand how the meta works before you decide to apply it to your guild, right? Another very important part that makes this meta strong is that it's interrupt resistant, right? Interrupts are not gonna work against this meta because this meta doesn't really have channels. And the channels that it does have, like Raven Strike, it's uninterruptible. Right, so if you think about it, like Demon Fang and shit, right? Like there's no channel, so there's nothing to cancel, there's nothing to interrupt, right? So because there's nothing to interrupt, then therefore this meta is resilient to things that interrupt, such as Judicator Helmet. This is why Judicator Helmet is not as used as it used to be, right? It doesn't mean that Judicator Helmet suddenly sucks. It just means that it's not used because it doesn't make sense, right? So that's the kind of stuff that's another strength for this meta, right? Another one is that a lot of people are using Graveguard Boots and Boots of Valor, right? Because they give immunity to like stuns, roots, and slows, right? That's a strength of this meta because if you get to flood your enemy, you don't really need to have full sprints because you're not sprinting to your enemy to hit them. You're already inside of them. So you're able to get away with a lower, like a lower sprint, basically like, it's not even a sprint, honestly. It's like let's call it a fucking little run, right? A little jog. Like you get to get away with having a little jog on your character instead of a fucking sprint, right? So that's really what it is, right? So, but that is a strength because of the way it's played, right? It's flood. You flood your enemy, and then you have Graveguard Boots or whatever, and you can walk inside of them without any issues, right? So now we're gonna look at the weaknesses of this meta. Okay, the weaknesses of this meta is that this meta is susceptible to heavy compositions of tank and supports. Okay, why? Because if the burst engage, remember again, they all engage at the same time, right? So if the burst engage is countered, this meta falls apart, right? If they call a full engage onto a clump and that clump doesn't die, it gets reflected. There's Judicator armors. The D tanks stop the engage. There's enigmatics. There's heals, right? All of those things happen, and they basically absorb the damage. Then now suddenly, what do you have? What is the position? What is the situation that you are now in? You have your entire fucking melee DPS Zerg right in front of the fucking enemy, and you don't have cooldowns, and they do. It's really simple, right? You're gonna get countered, you're gonna get fucking wrecked, right? So, one of the strong weaknesses of this meta is simply that if there's a lot of fucking tanks, if there's a lot of frontline tanks on the opposite side, it's gonna be really hard to flood them, isn't it? Because if they got a lot of Grail Seekers, how the fuck are you gonna walk in? And you're like, oh, well, I'll pop my Graveguard Boots. And it's like, yeah, how far is that shit gonna take you? And you don't think you're gonna get fucking purged with the Duskweaver armor? Or a heavy mate's gonna purge you when they see you running at them? Of course they will, because they're doing their fucking job, right? So now you don't have boots, and now you're getting slowed, and you're getting stunned, and you're getting rooted. So, yes, one of the weaknesses of this meta is heavy tanks on the other side. So again, that's a clue, right? So, another one is, and we already talked about this one. This one's chokes, territories, and castles, right? Melee is absolutely useless when fighting over walls. It's just that simple, right? Like, they can't shoot over walls. Just like there's nothing else to say about that. They just can't shoot over walls. And if you're fighting an enemy that's, protecting themselves behind walls, and they have ranged DPS and you don't, then you're at a huge disadvantage, right? So another weakness of this meta, and this is what Latorian mentioned earlier, is the kiting enemies, right? If an enemy is kiting you, they're not allowing you to flood them. And if they can't flood you, if you can't flood the enemy, if you have a melee burst DPS comp and you can't flood the enemy, suddenly you're fucking dead. Because your only advantage stems from being able to flood the enemy. Remember, what were the advantages? Chaos, right? Chaos, why? Because you're inside the enemy and the enemy gets lost. But what if you can't get inside the enemy? Then you don't have the advantage of chaos. What about individualistic? You get to do whatever you want. You move around in whatever direction you want. Okay, if you're inside the enemy, then doing whatever you want allows you to kind of move inside the enemy as you will and position yourself well for that engage. But if the enemy's kiting you and you're never able to reach the enemy, can you actually do anything? No. So it doesn't matter that it's individualistic, right? Interrupt resistance. If you're inside the enemy, that's when you're really scared about getting interrupted about things, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm gonna be inside the enemy, but they're gonna fucking Judy helm me and they're gonna stop my E. It's like, sure. But what if you can't even get inside the enemy and you're a melee DPS? You're never gonna hit them. It's just that simple. So what I'm saying is the strengths of this meta fall apart the moment that an enemy does not allow them to flood into their Zerg. right? The entire meta starts to fall apart. And here's another weakness of this meta, is that this meta doesn't use Nighthound very often. If you look around, now Escalation started using Nighthound more and more, but they still don't use enough. They really don't, right? So what I'm saying is, for the most part, they don't use Nighthound that often. Which means what? That this entire fucking meta is vulnerable as fuck to anything that knocks back. So firewalls, right? Like Brimstone Fire, the W from firewall, right? Wind wall, right? And anything else that basically, give me a second here. Yeah, so anything else that basically bumps the enemy back or does anything where they knock back or knock up, like even the Soul Scythe, right? No, Soul Scythe knocks it up, but even those things, right? They're not gonna be viable because the person's not using Nighthound, so they're not gonna be viable in the fight, right? If I can't get to the front, if I can't flood the enemy because there's a bunch of firewalls everywhere, because there's a bunch of wind walls everywhere, if I can't get there, then what's the point of me running fucking melee DPS, right? Because I need to get there, and the enemy's making it so hard. So that's another weakness of the meta, right? So those are the weaknesses of the meta, and at this point, you already kind of know where I'm going and exactly how to counter the meta, right? If you can't figure it out on your own, you're not really thinking broadly about all the issues that is with this meta, right? The exploits that you can do, and so I'm gonna break it down, right? So very simple, kiting composition, right? We already talked about that. But what is a kiting composition, right? We need a high usage of icicles for the slows, right? And also the root on the W, right? But also the icicles, they should be running Dustweaver armors, right? Because they'll purge the boots. Because again, the boots will get through their slows and roots, right? But if you run Dustweaver armor, guess what? Suddenly they can't get through your slows and roots. Grail Seekers, exact same thing. You root them and you drop a Dustweaver armor. Then they can't get through your roots. And yeah, Martial says Bedrock. Yeah, that's the next one, right? Bedrock Mace. Bedrock Mace is incredible right now with this meta. It's absolutely OP against this meta. It really, really is. But people don't use it. People don't use it because traditionally Bedrock Mace has been viewed as a like a troll weapon. Right, like a shitter weapon, like a troll weapon. Like it's never actually been taken seriously into ZvZ. But I'll tell you the truth, man. Bedrock Mace against this meta is absolutely amazing right now. It's absolutely amazing right now, and I don't understand why people are not running it. And icicles, people are not running icicles often, right? Grail Seekers, yeah, you see Grail Seekers, but that's it. Now imagine if you had Grail Seekers, icicles, and bedrocks. And they have, you know, they have the fucking the Dustweaver armor. This meta will never catch you. This meta will never flood you. And if this meta can never flood you, this meta will never beat you. It's really, really that simple, right? Another part to countering this meta is reliance on knockbacks, right? So we talked about that, like the Night Armor, right? The Soul Scythe, the Firewalls, right? We talked about that you have those, right? So again, let's say they get through your icicles, they get through your Grail Seekers, the Dustweaver armors, right? They're not going to get through your Night Armor as well. They're not going to get through your Bedrock Maces. They're not going to get through your Firewalls. They get through all of those, then you know what? You deserve to die, right? Like if you have all of those and they still are able to flood you, then you're fucking doing something really wrong. Like that's really what it is. That's really what it comes down to, right? These are the things that will make you completely unkillable by the current melee burst DPS meta. Another thing is you're going to have anti-burst rolls, right? Things like Enigmatic. Remember, they run Enigmatic because they know they're going to fight against the same meta, right? You're going to fight against the same meta too, so you need Enigmatics too. You need to stop when they do clump you. You need to make sure they don't kill you, right? So Enigmatics are very important. Judicator armor is incredibly important because Judicator armors help the heals and ensure that your Zerg, even if your Zerg does take a lot of damage, you're able to heal that back up quickly and stabilize. That's extremely important because if your Zerg can't stabilize, it makes it a lot easier for the enemy to flood you, right? So you need a stable Zerg, and to have a stable Zerg, you need Judicator armors, all right? Another thing you need is some, not a lot, right? But some soft pressure DPS. So what I'm talking about is bruisers, right? You need some bruisers. The Clarent Blade with the new W is a great usage of this. It's a great example. Okay, the Halberd or Inferno Sides. Now Inferno Sides not as much, but Halberd definitely with the bleeds, absolutely. Why do you want this? Because what if they do flood you? What if they do end up flooding you? Oh, okay, like I said, you're fucked. But you gotta try to at least survive, right? Well, if you have some soft pressure DPS like Halberds and like bruiser type style players, right? Like Clarent Blades, what you're gonna have is the enemy's gonna flood you, and guess what? Your bruisers are gonna be doing damage to them while they're inside of you. So you're actually punishing them for flooding you. And by punishing them for flooding you, hopefully it gives you enough of a window to kind of back up and push them out of the inside of your Zerg, right? Soft pressure DPS as well is going to include things like single target pressure, right? So single target pressure, we don't see a lot of it anymore. But the Brimstone Q, the single target Brimstone Q, not the third Q, the first Q. The first Q on Brimstone, or any fire for that matter, right? You use that shit with the passive for the I think it's the third passive. It reduces the cast times, okay? That Q with that cast time passive on the fire weapon, you can burn anybody. And so if an enemy does walk into you as a Brimstone player, just fucking use your Qs non-stop on him. And if he walks at you, throw your firewall, right? There's so much you can accomplish with fire against a flood style Zerg. And again, think about this. Why did this meta come to be? Guess what? A lot of people don't run fire anymore. And a lot of people, if they do run fire, they either run the second Q or the third Q. And beyond that, they don't run firewalls, right? The majority of the game doesn't run firewalls, and they don't run single target Qs on the fires. So then you're like, oh my God, I can't get these guys out of the inside of our Zerg. How do I push them out? Well, it's because you're not equipped for it. It's that simple. This is why Brimstones are so important to the Zerg. Another part for like single target pressure is going to be like the siege bows or weepings, like the auto fire Q, not the little fucking explosive crap Q that a lot of people like. No, I'm talking about the auto fire Q. That shit's also a lot of damage, right? And also the W, they can use caltrops, and that's kind of like a little slow. It does help. And on top of the little slow, it gives the person a little bit of a speed boost. For the siege bow, like they can run a little farther, so it makes it harder for the enemy melee DPS to flood if they have a speed boost, right? So these are all little things that matter so much, right? They matter so much, but again, people don't think about the meta. So if they don't think about the meta, they never can counter it. And the few people that do think about the meta and tell their members like, yo, we got to do this, nobody listens to them because they're like, why you think you're better than Escalation? It's like, yeah, they're not the best in the game ever. They're not. They're only the best right now. And that's what people need to get through their heads, is that they're only the best right now because people are not countering them. And I'm telling you, this is why I'm going to do that VOD review with that Escalation video where Escalation tries to play ranged DPS on Monday, right? Because in that fight, they do so terribly that it shows you that they literally cannot fight outside of their meta. So if you destroy the meta, if you do everything I'm telling you right now, suddenly they're going to be forced to play ranged DPS. And you know what? They did terrible as ranged DPS. Now, I'm not saying they're going to forever do terrible as ranged DPS. No, they can learn, right? They can learn and adapt, and that's important, right? Obviously. And being that Escalation players are really good players, they're probably going to learn and adapt and become better. And that's great. But that's what you should be doing first. You shouldn't wait until they start changing. You should start changing now so that you become the top of the game at some point, right? So all those things are very important. You also need like area denial type DPS. So area denial type DPS is like Weepings and Siege Bows, right? Weepings and Siege Bows are very important because when you shoot the E of a Siege Bow, the entire time it's channeling, people are like, oh my God, that's COVID. And they're like, oh shit, I gotta back up. I gotta move away from it, right? I 6 feet away, right? Because people just don't like being inside of DPS. They just don't. And it's good that they don't, right? But generally speaking, Siege Bow is gonna deny access to certain areas. I can't tell you how many times like a Zerg is told, push through a choke, and then one fucking person shoots an E siege bolt on that choke, and suddenly everybody just stands back and waits till that siege bolt's done shooting through on that choke. It's like that one siege bolt's not gonna kill you all, but it's like you just have it ingrained in your mind that you don't want to get shot at, so you're just gonna stand back until it's done. But that one extra second that the siege bolt bought for the entire Zerg may have just saved the entire Zerg from dying. Right? It's very, very important. So area denial is important. Another thing is like weeping, right? Somebody drops a weeping and suddenly everybody's like, ah, everybody runs away, right? It's like nobody wants to be near a weeping. And then if a weeping pops, the caller is like, why did you pop the weeping? You know, like, are you blind? Right? Like literally, like that's what they do. And it's like, listen, weepings are so weepings makes people so afraid that nobody wants to get close to them. So it denies area, denies that space, right? Nobody wants to be near a fucking weeping. So again, those DPS are very important to denying space, because if they try to flood you, you can deny access to certain areas, at least for a second or two, and that will give you time to reposition, right? Those are all things that you should be doing, right? You should also have a few CC support DPS. So like, you know, crowd control style support DPS, right? What I mean by that is like permafrost, right? Permafrost is very good because the E roots people. Again, so the permafrost, a lot of people don't like it because basically it's not a lot of damage, but what it is that it's trading damage for a utility, and the utility is stopping people from, you know, engaging on you or flooding you or pushing you, right? They also have the W, which they can use as the beam. The beam W for Frost is underused, man. You use that shit when enemy tries to flood you. Oh my God, dude. Like, it's crazy, right? But they also have the blink. I mean, they can just blink, right, with the W, which is like the root on the W, right? And again, that's also helping to ensure that you're able to keep kiting. And it's also stopping the enemy from flooding you. These are things that are very important. So having a couple permafrost in your Zerg is very useful against this style of play. Another one is like, if you have a curse, like let's say like a damnation, right? You have a damnation, everybody runs Pierce on the damnation. It's like, listen, Pierce is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating against Pierce. But what I am saying is, don't be afraid to use the root W for the curse, right? Because if you are backing up, and then you have one extra guy that has an extra root, that actually helps a lot, right? And it's a pretty good root, to be honest, like the curse root. It's a pretty good root, right? Or people who are running life curse, right? Life curse. You can run the root W with them as well, right? Root W for curse is actually really, really good, right? It's very underrated. I'm not saying it replaces the Pierce, but I'm saying it's underrated, and there should be at least one, maybe two people who are cursed in the Zerg that do run it. It would be very helpful against this meta. Again, everything is against this meta. It's not against all metas, right? Everything changes when the enemy comes out with a different meta, right? So the last thing that you're going to need to counter this meta is going to be using move speed buffers, right? So move speed buffers, I mean, it's obviously like occult, right? But think more broadly than occult, right? Everybody thinks, oh yeah, we need occults. We need to move faster. We need occults. It's like, that's like the automatic answer. It's like, no, man, you got to be creative. You have to be a lot more creative. Think about this. The Beetle W gives speed boost, doesn't it? But how do Beetle players use their W? They don't use it to speed their Zerg up, not the majority. The majority use it to try to engage and then use their E, right? That's wrong. Beetles should be told, no, use your W to speed up the Zerg and help the Zerg reposition. You start doing that and suddenly your Zerg moves way faster. It's incredible. Another thing is arcanes. Arcanes that run the cleanse W. I mean, honestly, most arcanes in the game should be running cleanse W. And if they're not, I mean, they're probably beaming. And if if they're not doing that, and they're using like Mimic, I guess Mimic can be okay. But to be honest, in this scenario, Arcane Cleanse W is extremely useful because it gives a speed boost, right? And so instead of using the Cleanse W to try to just cleanse, and you're holding your W, and you're holding your W, and you're holding your W all fight long, and you're like, I'm just going to use it whenever the enemy gets clumped. And it's like, or when we get clumped, right? When the enemy gets a clump. It's like, no, man, use it when you need to reposition. You see a couple guys that are falling behind or getting caught by people, right? And the enemy's trying to flood you and you're trying to kite. Drop that fucking cleanse W on them, even if they're not rooted, stunned, or anything. Why? Because it'll speed them up. It'll make them faster. Doing these things proactively in the Zerg will help you stay mobile and will help you not allow the enemy to flood you, right? Those are the goals. So, Latorian says, Halberd easily spreading 3 stacks, bleeding in the back line, so necessary. Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like, spreading the stacks in the enemy back line is so important with like a Halberd. But think about how easy it is if the enemy's flooding you. Now the Halberd literally has his job done for him, right? It's so underrated. It's so underrated. So the last part that we're going to get into here is the strategy requirements, right? These are requirements that you need to kind of follow as a strategy. And this is more for the callers rather than individual players. But individual players should be aware of these things so that they don't make these mistakes, okay? So one of the big strategy requirements is whenever possible, you need to try to fight on chokes, right? You have an advantage in the sense that you're probably running more range DPS than the enemy because the enemy is melee DPS, right? So use the chokes. A melee DPS Zerg cannot push a choke unless you make a mistake. So just hold the choke and be patient. Just wait. Let them come to you. Let them come to you. And when they do come to you, punish them, right? And then they're going to try to flood you. Don't let them flood you. Kite them. Fight, walk backwards. Speed up your Zerg. Stun the enemy. Root them. Slow them. Purge their boots, right? Be proactive. But at the same time, don't leave your disengaged tanks behind. Because if your disengaged tanks die, guess what? The enemy's going to flood you. It's really that simple, right? So try to fight on chokes. Make them push into you. Be patient, all right? The next part is you got to try to do the style that is called like turn and burn, right? Where you literally are backing up, you're kiting, and then you literally turn around, you engage the first 2 dudes that you see with your entire Zerg. You just engage 2 people. The first 2 people you see. It doesn't matter if it's a tank, a DPS, a healer, a fucking whatever. It doesn't matter. Even if it's a battle mount, who gives a fuck? The first 2 people you see, clump them, engage on them, and then keep moving. And the reason I say that is because if you engage on them, let's say you get 2 kills, you secure 2 kills, great, and you keep on moving. You do that, you don't let the enemy catch up to you. But if you try to get greedy and say, oh, let's turn around and let's get a big clump and dump on their clump, you know what you're actually doing? You're giving them the ability to catch up to you. You're giving them the ability to flood you. Because yes, maybe you're going to get a big clump and maybe you're going to kill the entire clump. But guess what? Right after you kill that clump, they have a 50, 60, 70 other dudes who are going to flood you. And there's nothing you can do about it because you walked yourself into them. That was your mistake. But if you kill just 2 people, the 2 people at the front, and then you keep walking backwards, they'll never catch you. And so every time you turn around and kill 2 people, guess what? You're whittling them down bit by bit. Little by little, you're making them die one by one. And that kind of death, that slow, painful death is the worst, man. I'll tell you, it's the worst if you're on the receiving end. You understand? They're going to get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, you know what they're going to do? They're going to start making mistakes, more and more mistakes. And then you can exploit those mistakes. So again, the key is be patient. Don't be greedy, right? Don't try to end the fight with one big engage. You have to be patient and bleed them out one by one, front to back. Never try to dive their back line. Because remember, their only goal is to flood your back line. And so if you flood their back line, you know what else you're doing? You're letting them flood yours. You cannot allow that, right? That is an important piece to this. So again, you engage shallow. You only hit the very front. You never overextend, right? Obviously, another requirement of the strategy is just don't get flooded, right? Like, just don't get flooded. Like, do whatever the fuck you need to do to not get flooded. If it means that you lose 10 people because they were slow and rotating, then guess what? It means you lose 10 people because they were slow. It is what it is. They're necessary sacrifice. Because if you go and be like, oh no, I need to save those 10 people, and you turn around, you know what you're doing? You're allowing them to flood you, and then now your entire Zerg dies, right? You have to basically know that if the enemy floods you, it's almost basically GG. You cannot allow that to happen. And so with that, you have to take your losses where you have the losses and take your advantages where you have your advantages, right? Another big important thing is stay spread. And this is especially if you do get flooded. right? If you do get flooded, but even if you don't get flooded, you need to have this in your head at all times. Stay spread, completely spread. As much ground as you have, east to west, north to south, take it. Expand your Zerg as much as possible. Even if your Zerg is not within view of the collar of the Zerg, of the collar, right? If they're not within view of the collar, it's okay, as long as they're within distance of the enemy to be able to catch them if a call is made. But here's the thing. It's very important to stay spread. And the reason is because, again, the enemy works on individual clumps, right? Again, remember I said at the very beginning, I said they don't engage multiple clumps at the same time. They tend to engage one clump at the same time, right? All their entire Zerg is going to hit one clump, right? Well, if you're very spread, what's the likelihood of that clump that they do hit and kill? What's the likelihood that that clump is going to be big? Not very high. So therefore, staying spread is a natural way to make sure that the enemy is not able to overwhelm you. Does that make sense? So the last thing about the strategy requirement is that you need to identify the enemy weaknesses, right? And these are the weaknesses that we already talked about. But on top of that, because remember, you're playing front to back. I think this video is playing again. Oh no, I think he does this with all the videos. Africa. Yeah, you should follow him, man. He puts some good videos. Anyway, so you need to identify the enemy's weaknesses, right? They're the weaknesses I already told you about, but those are compositional weaknesses. I want you to pay attention to the enemy weaknesses on the field, okay? If you're playing front to back, who do you think is going to be the first few people on the enemy Zerg that are going to die? It's going to be the enemy tanks, right? Obviously, because the tanks are usually the ones up in the front. Yeah, sure, you might kill a DPS or a healer here and there, but generally speaking, the majority of the people you're going to kill are going to be tanks. So this means that you need to pay attention to all the tanks that you're killing, and then pay attention to the enemy front line. And look at how little by little the enemy front line tends to thin out. And then slowly and surely they get less and less tanks in the front. And at some point, and this is mainly for the caller, at some point, the enemy is not going to have very many tanks left. And guess what? When the enemy doesn't have a lot of tanks left, you stop kiting. That's when you stop kiting. That's when you hold the line. Make them walk into you. Dare them to flood you. And the reason is because if they don't have enough tanks, they can't stop you anymore. They simply can't. There's nothing they can do. They can't stop you. And so when you engage on them, there's nothing they can do to survive. You're just going to kill them. And now instead of them flooding you, it's you flooding them and finishing the fight. Right? So view different roles in the enemy Zerg as a target in and of themselves. It's very easy to be like, oh, I need to kill this guy because he's the caller. I need to kill this guy because he's the battle mount, right? But you need to visualize the roles as a whole, right? We tend to look at healers and be like, yeah, kill healers, that's important. But we don't realize how important it is to kill tanks. Just imagine if you had to go out to a ZvZ without any tanks. You would die instantly, wouldn't you? But what if you can do that to your enemy? Kite, 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 turn around, kill the first tank you see. Kite, 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 turn around, kill the first 2 tanks you see. Keep doing it over and over and over. Eventually, when they don't have many tanks left, completely run them over. And then you can play however you want. At that point, I mean, it's up to you. The ZvZ is up to you. You know what I mean? You're already at a huge advantage. If you lose the fight at that point, I mean, you you got some other shit to work on, right? So that is how you destroy this meta, right? And throughout this entire episode, I talked mostly about escalation. But again, remember, from the beginning, I said Black Order, right? I said Pora. There are many other guilds, man, that do this. I want you guys to go into every ZvZ. I want you guys to look at the enemy composition. Don't just look at the enemy numbers. Don't just look at the way they're playing. I want you to look at the actual composition. How many range DPS do they actually have? If they don't have a lot of range DPS, then guess what? They probably are running a heavy melee comp. And if they're running a heavy melee comp, then you already know instantly, boom, I just need to kite them. I need to kite them forever, and that's it. Now, I understand sometimes you have objectives like, oh no, like I have to protect this, or I have to take this territory, I have whatever. I understand. But this is why you got to understand the concepts, right? You got to understand what you need to do. And then it's up to you to accomplish it on the field. All right. So with that, we're done. We're done. We actually finished on a good time today. On Monday, we kind of went a little too far, a little too much, but yeah, we're finished. So if you guys got any questions about anything, whether it's something that we talked about today or some other day, or anything that you'd like to question about compositions of Zergs or styles or whatever. You got anything, just drop it in the chat right now. I'll answer whatever questions you guys got. I'll give you guys a couple minutes. One question: when BA come back? Never. I don't think it'll ever come back. Lechero says, hello, yo, like the last minute, bad get here too late. Yo, oh yeah, you got here late. It's okay. Listen, I'm gonna post the VOD in YouTube, right? So YouTube is at AO University. So yeah, I'm gonna post the VOD there. It should be there in a few hours. It usually takes like 4 or 5 hours to like actually get up there and like high quality and all that. It does take a while. So, but yeah, in about 5, maybe 6 hours at most, it'll be on the YouTube. So if you missed anything, or you want to watch anything, or you want to rewatch any of the stuff that I talked about, then it's gonna be there. The other videos from the previous episodes are also there. So if you guys like the video today, make sure you guys hit the follow. Yeah, it helps me a lot. I enjoy seeing you guys hit the follow button, and the little fucking thing that comes up. It's a little growth keeper guy, fucking hitting nothing, and then he gets shot by an arrow and dies, and there's like a loot bag next to him. I don't know if you guys seen it. I dropped the follow, and we'll pay attention for the next. Great, we'll be there too. Awesome, thank you, appreciate you. All right. With that, thank you guys for coming. Tomorrow's stream is gonna be at the same time. It's going to be episode 4. It's going to be Zerg Bootcamp, right? So this is when I'm going to tell you guys about basically how to train a Zerg. What are a good way to kind of like train a Zerg without expending too much money, right? Because everybody can train a Zerg while spending shitloads of fucking billions, right? And then just getting wiped over and over and over. But there are many ways to train a Zerg, right? So this is kind of more for like a general video trying to teach people how to progress in the game as a Zerg, right? But it also helps for the individual players. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. And then the VOD review is going to be on Monday stream, same time. So I will post this on YouTube, like I said. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. I'll see you guys next time.